Welcome back, fight fans, to another episode of The Big Fight. And this week, we've got a co-host on us, a co-host on with us. That's not Johnston. And I'd like to introduce on former guest on Ones to Watch, Luke Byrne. Luke, how you doing?
How's things, Sean? How are you?
Good. Yeah, good. Thank you for obviously taking the time out to come on, do this big fight preview for what is going to be a brilliant fight this coming weekend. Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez, all the marbles, all the belts in the super lightweight division, and it's a great fight to be talking about. And I'm really happy that we've got somebody like yourself who's going on a journey themselves. And if anybody that doesn't already know about you, then please, guys, if you're listening, you've not heard Luke's story, go on our Wants to Watch season 4. Please listen to Luke's episode, hear about his journey, how things have been going for him, and obviously we'll have a little bit of a chat with you later just to sort of see where things are at this moment in time. But Luke, let's hand it over to you first and foremost. Like this fight this weekend, I just want to get your initial thoughts before we go into a proper breakdown of it.
It's an absolute blockbuster of an event. It's the two, number 1 and number 2 in the division, undisputed. You can't get any better than that in the 4-belt era. You're getting all the belts on the line, the best versus the best, and we'll find out who is number 1 in the 140-pound division. So I can't wait for it.
So as always then, fans, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a little bit of a breakdown. We're going to go into a bit of a review of both fighters' careers. We'll look at what they've done in the past few fights, both Ramirez, both Taylor, talk about a few fights in particular, and then go into a bit of a breakdown of how we see this fight going down. And of course, get ourselves out there, put the predictions out there and see what we both think about how this fight's actually going to play out and what will happen on Saturday night. And of course, we've got our recap of the weekend's action that's just gone, talking about Joshua Buatsi's performance this weekend in Manchester, talk about Tommy McCarthy. We've got some great fights to talk about there as well, but let's get straight into this. Taylor versus Ramirez, one of the most exciting fights for 2021, and it's a fight that's been a long time coming, and I'm glad that they've actually got to see this over the line now, because we've been talking about this fight for about 2 years, with these two guys steadily progressing throughout the ranks, and Josh Taylor in particular coming from these shores. He's really done so well to steadily progress himself throughout the division. I was thinking back today about some of the early fights that he had and the tests that he had throughout his career. And I go back to even as far as when he fought Dave Ryan and obviously the domestic dust-up with O'Hara Davis. And I think to myself, these fights, Luke, these are the type of fights that have really steadily progressed him the right way throughout the ranks and got him to where he is and led him into the bigger fights, which we'll talk about. That's the way I've seen Josh Taylor's career go, and I think for me, it's an ideal way of progressing a boxer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even from Josh Taylor's debut, which was in Texas on the Carl Frampton undercard, he was thrown in the deep end straight away from home, foreign organization, different rules over there in America, and he had to deal with that and get his pro debut out of the way away from home, which isn't easy for anyone to do, especially as the home fighter, so to speak. So that was great for him straight away. You mentioned Dave Ryan as well, who was a great journeyman / English level fighter, who could be a banana skin for lads who've only had single digits of fights. And Taylor dealt with him very well. And then you have O'Hara Davies, who everyone knows wasn't on Taylor's level on the night, but a man like him who can punch and who was there to win. He had an undefeated record. He wanted to prove everybody wrong, including his own promoter, Eddie Hearn, at the time. So he had a lot to prove, and he went out and he tried to do his best, but obviously Taylor on the night too good for him. But it's an upbringing like that is why Taylor's got to where he's got to within 17 fights, and which is two belts, WBSS champion. So he's accomplished a lot in such a short space of time.
And it's them fights for me that have really put him in this position now where, I can't even think about, looking at a negative for Josh Taylor in terms of his build up to this fight, because, his past 4 fights, he's fought guys with undefeated records. And it's not even like you could say he's had an easy fight in the past 4 fights. The last fight against Kong Song was a bit of a blowout. Of course it was. It was a great body shot. Kong Song just couldn't get up from it. And people felt like, oh no, this was a walkover for him. But nobody can nobody can predict how a fight's going to go down. Nobody can predict if a
No.
perfect punch lands that it's going to keel a fighter over. And that's exactly what he did. And he was undefeated. Although nobody really knew him over here, he was undefeated. And so was the previous 3 fighters before that as well. You think of Regis Prograis. You think of, obviously, the fighters he's been in with prior to that as well. Yeah, Baranchik in the World Boxing Super Series. And you think of that type of step up in levels that he's had. This has put him in absolutely perfect stead ahead of this fight. And I think, when we discuss Ramirez in a few moments, there's one particular fighter in Victor Postol that they've both fought, and we can talk about the comparisons with both fights there, but there's not a lot. There's not a lot for me to say about the way Josh Taylor's steadied himself for his career, because he's got to this level by taking the necessary step up at the right time. And we know he's had some management troubles outside of the ring, and obviously issues with the McGuigans. But fair play to them, because they helped him get there, I think.
They did, and I mean, you can say what you want about the McGuigans, whatever your opinion is, that's your opinion, but they did steer the ship very well with Josh Taylor, and they backed him 100%. They betted on him, and they didn't have to put him in the WBSS. They didn't have to risk his record, so to speak, so quickly. They could have steadied him on for another 2 or 3 years, had him 25, 26-0 before he even fought for a world title. But they didn't. They backed him, and it's paid off. And like even you mentioned against Kong Song, like he was an unknown quantity, just like the Mexicans that have been coming over lately and beating some of the UK fighters on matchroom shows. The Thai lads, these lads have been fighting since they're 4 or 5 years old. So they're tough as old boots, like. And that body shot that Taylor put him down with would have put anyone down on that night. It wasn't just because it was a unknown fighter from Thailand. Like, it was a perfectly placed punch to the liver, and you just don't get up from those no matter who you are.
So looking at like what we've got to go ahead with now, we've got Jose Ramirez, who for most boxing fans is a guy that obviously holds the 2 belts in the division, barring what Josh Taylor already holds, of course. And his journey's been a little bit different, because you look at his resume and you think of the last few fights he's had, the 3 fights in particular that I look to, and I look at the highlights of them particular fights, and I think to myself, this is also a guy who's steadily progressed himself through the rankings. He's done it took him a little bit longer than obviously Josh, but he's still gone up the level to the same type of opponents. Jose Cepeda, who's also fighting on the undercard, ironically. He fought Jose Cepeda 2019, obviously beat him majority decision. The coming out fight for me was the Maurice Hooker fight. That's the one where I think most people looked at Ramirez and it's like, wow, this guy is legit.
He's a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah, because look at the fights he had. 2018, Antonio, I can't even pronounce his name, Ozarko, WBC title, obviously there. He's got Jose Cepeda, he's got Maurice Hooker, and his last fight,
Postol,
which is the one that I think most people are going to look to now, and they're going to look at it and say, well, how did Josh Taylor get on against him? What was his performance like? And how was Ramirez's performance against Postol? Now, I've watched both fights again today in preparation for our episode, and I was looking at both of them, and I watched Ramirez first and foremost, and looking at that fight, he seemed to chase Postol around the ring quite a lot in that fight, trying to land the left hook on multiple occasions, and Postol actually had a pretty good fight against him. He really did push Ramirez back a few times. What did you make of that performance from Ramirez?
I thought that Postol started the fight off very well, controlling the ring. And Ramirez likes to be a fast starter, and he didn't get going until maybe 4 or 5 rounds into that fight. And I remember in particular during that fight, Andre Ward and Timothy Bradley arguing over who was winning the fight, because Andre Ward had it totally different to how Bradley had it. He was rating Ramirez's aggression and pressure, whereas it was Postol who was landing the punches, as Bradley correctly said. So I thought Postol fought very well, but I thought that Eastern European block style is perfect. Like, the Mexican style is tailor-made for them lads. They'll happily sit back and jab and grab and throw their odd right hand. And that's what Postol was able to do. And he used the ring very well as well in his height against Ramirez, who likes to fight hunched over. He doesn't fight tall. Even though he's not a small guy, he doesn't fight tall. So that kind of played into Postol's hands. Now down the stretch, obviously, as we know, Ramirez did end up getting to him and edged it out on points. And I think he was the deserving winner. But I also wouldn't look at that fight too much. I wouldn't look into it too much because there's so much differences between Taylor and Ramirez that you can't really compare because it's chalk and cheese. And I think the fight I would look at the most for Ramirez would be the Zepeda fight, because that fight has aged very well, especially since Zepeda's win over Barancek, which was, in my opinion, that was my fight of the year last year. I couldn't take my eyes off that fight. And Zepeda's a southpaw. He moves well and he can punch. But the difference is, I think, again, Ramirez outworked him down the stretch. He has that engine. But that's something that Taylor has as well, as we've seen against Prograis, because I had Prograis winning up until the 9th round, and then Taylor came on strong again. So they both have the engine. But I think Taylor, if you're looking for the Postol fight, Taylor dealt with him so well because of the game plan. And as we've seen when Terence Crawford fought Postol, Postol does not like southpaws. He just can't deal with them as well as he can with orthodox fighters. So I think that played a big role in Postol struggling where he didn't struggle against Ramirez.
So how do you think that Ramirez could win this fight? What do you think Ramirez has to do to be able to beat Josh Taylor?
I think Ramirez has to be busy and he has to start fast. And he has to put Taylor under pressure that he's never been put under before. Because you have, like, say, Taylor's fight against Barancek. Barancek comes forward, head down, hands up, throwing lots of punches over the top. And it took Taylor 2 or 3 rounds to kind of get the rhythm of him. And one thing that Ramirez has over the likes of Barancek is he has the Olympic pedigree. And I think he's probably one of the most underrated fighters from that 2012 Olympics in the pros. People often forget he was an Olympian. Now, the American Olympic team wasn't the greatest, but they have produced a lot of good pros, like Severus Spence from that team as well. You have Jamal Herring, who had a great performance there the other week. So I think Ramirez, if he can be busy but be smart with it, and one combination that I love from Ramirez that he started doing since he joined Robert Garcia is a jab, right hand, followed by a jab. He finishes on the jab, and it offsets his opponents very well. And I think if he can use that to set up to get inside on Taylor, he can give Taylor a lot of problems because Taylor won't be expecting him to keep it long and then suddenly come inside on him. And I think that's his key to victory there, get inside and work and not let Taylor do his own work, because Taylor is a mid-range fighter. So if he can keep it either far away or too close, Taylor will be quite uncomfortable.
That's exactly how I kind of see the fight, playing out, in the sense that Ramirez is going to be the one that's going to have to come forward, and he's going to have to be careful of not walking forward in straight lines. He's going to have to be moving that head. He's just going to have to be up and down constantly, and just he's going to have to be sort of, for me, he's going to have to be trying to distract Josh as he's making his way in, because the way Josh is going to fight, as we'll come on to in a minute, he's going to fight in a certain way where he's just going to keep popping off the jab, and he's just going to keep trying to distract Ramirez as he's coming in. And Ramirez is one thing I've noticed about him over the past few fights that he's got better at is the ability to cut the ring down and make it even smaller for a fighter.
Yeah,
to trap him either in the corners or against the ropes. And as you was rightly saying, if he gets in Taylor's face and he starts to smother his work a little bit, it's going to be difficult for Taylor to then get the shots off that he wants to get off. Now, the one thing I will say in defense of Taylor is that he fights well on the inside as well. So when they do get on the inside, it is going to be really interesting to see who wins that battle, because I think, for me, that's where the battle's going to be won, because Ramirez is a really strong inside fighter, and what Taylor's shown me is the same thing over the past few fights, especially the Prograis fight. The Prograis fight in particular was the one where I felt like he really had to adapt his game plan, and he really had to adapt his style to be able to go in with a guy like Prograis who was willing to trade on the inside. So for me, the way I look at Ramirez's keys to victory is very similar to you, in the sense that he does need to cut the ring off, he does need to come on the inside, he needs to smother the work, and he needs to be just throwing like these sort of short left hands and short uppercuts on the inside. And I noticed he was doing that a lot against Postel. At first, against Postel, he started throwing them sort of mid-range, but then as he got closer, and he got on the inside, you could see just little short ones, throwing little short uppercuts, and I was like, really, really clever stuff. This is what Taylor's gonna have to be dealing with. So I suppose we flip it over to Taylor now, and how does Taylor win? What does Taylor have to do to keep a guy like Ramirez off him, but still be able to fight at range and be able to mix it up on the inside as well?
See, I think Taylor from the beginning is going to have to try and set his own pace and not let Ramirez just bully him and come and bum rush him, basically try and mug him. And if Taylor can do that for 2 or 3 rounds, get the rounds in, get his timing, get his jab going, and then if he wants to let Ramirez come forward a bit more so he can let the mid-range punches go, then he'll be happy out there. He'll stand there all day and do that. Because a couple of things that Taylor does really well is he throws his left uppercut across his own body. And for someone like Ramirez who likes to lean his head to the left, that'll be right in the trajectory of Josh's punch as he lets his uppercut go across his own shoulder like that, and he'll dig it in. And he'll land on Ramirez because Ramirez will be looking for the left hook to the body and the head. And another thing that Josh does really well, and I've watched him on pads with Ben Davison, what I can, after the hook, after his right hook, his lead hook, he'll dip under just like Manny Pacquiao and Freddie Roach on the pads. They've been practicing that, the hook and roll. And I think if he can land his right hook inside of Ramirez's left hook, because he wings it, he's quite wide with his left hook, Ramirez. He's not very short with it. So I think if he can get inside of Ramirez's own punches and then let his own shots go, roll out, and make Ramirez reset every time and keep him moving either which way, I think he can make the fight quite easy for himself, as tough as it will be, maybe mentally. I think he can make it quite easily physically for him. Because if he can do the simple things correct.
Yeah, I agree on that. I agree. I think when I've looked at Taylor's, again, I keep going back to Taylor's last few performances, and I think of the Postel one in particular when he fought Postel and the way he dealt with Postel. But Ramirez is a slightly smaller guy, obviously, this time around. So I think back to the Prograis fight, and I think what he's got to do is he has got to use the physical advantages he's got, and he needs to. Yeah. He does need to keep it mid-range. He does need to try and keep it mid-range for me. He needs to do exactly what you've suggested he needs to do. And he needs to just get in and get out as quickly as possible. And then use his footwork, use that lateral movement to get around the ring and let Ramirez chase him around the ring at times. Let him burn himself out. Let him throw them punches. Let him. One thing I noticed about Ramirez's performance against Postel was that when he was throwing that wide left hook, Postel telegraphed it, and he telegraphed it quite a few times really well. And then when he telegraphed that, you could see Postel come back with a counter, and it's like. I think Taylor could make it that easy for himself that it could just be a case of he just rolls and he just throws the counter, and it's like I think they've got. Go.
I think if Josh punches with Ramirez, he'll have a better chance of getting off because he has the southpaw lead hand. If he keeps that inside of Ramirez's left hand, as Ramirez is winging in the hook, if Josh can throw his short inside Ramirez's own punch, that'll be his best opportunity to land the heavy power shots inside of Ramirez's own punches, and then that way, then he'll be able to roll out from underneath as well. Because I met Josh at the weigh-in for the Lomachenko Luke Campbell fight, and he's a big lad. Like for a light welterweight, he is a big lad, and he's physically strong as well. He's never let anyone bully him in the ring. So I think if he is comfortable standing with Ramirez, he will in spots when it suits him. And as you say, like Ramirez really telegraphs that left hook. The only thing is you don't know whether it's going to body or head, but you know it's coming.
Yeah.
So if Taylor can punch as he's punching and get there first, because his punch will be shorter and he has the better feet, I think he'll be able to catch Ramirez coming in every time, and he'll be able to spin off then and make Ramirez have to reset and dance to his tune, essentially. Because Taylor is very physical if he has to be. And like you say, even against Postel, Ramirez did struggle to find his feet there for a long time. And against the southpaw, he struggled against Cepeda too, who is the southpaw that I'd most watch up coming to this fight. And Cepeda, I don't think Cepeda hits like Taylor hits. No. And I also don't think that Ramirez hits like Prograis hits. I think Prograis is probably one of the hardest one-punch punchers in the 140-pound division. So I think if Taylor can take those shots off Prograis, and he did get hit very clean off Prograis, I think he'll be able to take what Ramirez has for him and hopefully outlast him as well in the trenches if he has to.
So I suppose that brings us nicely onto the predictions segment then, and obviously now we've kind of given an insight into how both guys could potentially win the fight, how they win the fight, but the question is who's going to win? How do you see this going down? Who's going to win, and how is it going to happen?
Draw. I know. I think Taylor's going to win unanimous decision.
Yeah, I agree.
I could see it being maybe 116, 112, 117, 111 kind of a score. I think Ramirez is going to try and start fast, but I think Taylor's going to plant his feet early enough and let Ramirez know you're in for a fight here and you're not going to bully me around the ring. And then he's going to try and get his timing and he's going to use his boxing. And I think he's going to actually make a lot easier of a fight against Ramirez than people think. Because even though the coaching side of things, you might say, oh, well, Robert Garcia is a lot more experienced than Ben Davison is. But I think when it comes to just styles make fights at the end of the day, and I think Ramirez's style is more suited to Taylor's than Taylor's would be to Ramirez.
Yeah, it's a good assessment, and I think for me, I said I agree on the decision with Taylor winning via unanimous decision. I agree with that. I think that's how I've always seen this fight going down. You know, since it was announced, I thought about, you know, both guys' chances of winning this fight, and it's not because I'm being biased because, you know, Josh Taylor comes from these islands, but
yeah,
I see him being. Look, he is the more skillful boxer. He has got the ability, and he's shown he's got the ability to make fights a little bit more comfortable for him. But he's also shown, again, that he can go in and dig deep when he needs to. And we've seen that on a few occasions already in his career. And I think that experience in hand, I think that's what's going to get him through this fight and get him the victory. I think in terms of how close it could be, I could see it going two ways. I think Josh, I'll either completely outbox him and make him look a little bit amateurish, or the alternative will be it'll be really close and competitive all the way through, and Josh walks away, maybe getting 2 rounds, maybe a 115, 113 card. There possibly could be a shifty card in there somewhere along the line.
Well, yeah, it is boxing.
You look at the fights that Ramirez has had recently. You know, he's got quite a few majority decisions on his record where obviously one judge has kind of gone against him. So you just don't know how it's going to play out. But I can only really see Taylor getting the victory, and I'm not really underwriting the chances of Ramirez. I just feel like Josh has got the skills. He's got the skill set. He's got the experience. He's got the ability. And I think Ramirez, what he's shown me is that he's got a few flaws there that I think can be exploited quite well with the right game plan, and that's what it'll boil down to. Is there's going to be a game plan. You know, the first quarter of the fight, as you said, Josh needs to stamp his authority on it. The middle rounds, maybe Ramirez comes back a little bit, but I think it's them championship rounds, if I'm honest, that'll win this fight. I think it'll be them rounds that really do win this fight for Josh Taylor. So my prediction is going to be Josh Taylor. I think it'll be unanimous this time. I don't think it'll be a majority, but you just never know. But it's a great fight, and the fact that it is for all 4 belts is the fact that it is for them belts is really important to me, mostly because how often do we get to see a fight in any division where all the belts are on the line? It doesn't happen, does it?
No, I mean, even look at Lomachenko Lopez. That was almost tarnished because Lomachenko got upgraded to franchise champion. And then you have Devin Haney now, who's the WBC champion, even though it should be Lopez undisputed, but it's not now. Do you know what I mean? It's not often we actually get to see this. And at least it has happened outside the WBSS as well, which shows that you don't need a tournament to have the best fight the best.
I'm glad that they've made it. I am glad that they've made it. I think the fact that obviously it makes it easier, you know, in terms of the promotional side of thing, that they're both with Top Rank. I think obviously that's made
for sure
10 times easier. But I think you're right in what you're saying about it proves that you don't need a certain tournament to make a fight happen outside of it.
Yeah.
But what I will say, Luke, is I will say that tournament that Josh competed in, I think that's been the making of him.
For sure, yeah. I mean, it was sink or swim from the get go. Once he was in that, and he passed it with flying colours. He was what, 14-0? No, 13-0 when he went in there. Like, it's crazy to think that. Like, same as Usyk, pretty much. You know, like, their careers have nearly mirrored one another, in how they've done. And like, you know, Usyk was undisputed at cruiserweight, and I think Josh will end up going undisputed at light welterweight. And it's funny
Oh,
because you have this fight, and it has been made. It is for all the marbles, and it's almost gone under the radar compared to fights that haven't been made. You know, like, you look at, say, Crawford Spence, people are calling out for that. Obviously, you have the big one, Fury Joshua, and all that. But yet, this one that has been made, and it is going under the radar a little bit with the casual fans, so to speak. So I hope people do tune in and see these lads fight each other, because it is the best versus the best at the end of the day. And it is going to be a cracker. It's not going to be a stinker. There's literally no way this can be a bad fight, no matter who wins. So I'm really looking forward to it.
yeah, it's going to be a really, really great fight, and I'm really glad that we've had the opportunity to sit down and talk about it, because it's a fight. It's a fight, like you said. You're right in what you're saying. It's gone under the radar a little bit. It's like the promotion of it's not been. I mean, it might just be the way we've perceived it over here. Like I've perceived this as I've perceived this as a fight that's been a bit. It's been a bit under promoted from this side of the pond, but maybe, obviously, you know, we're not in America. We don't know how well it's been promoted there. But here,
True,
I don't really. I mean, I don't really see a lot of people, other than the hardcore boxing fraternity and obviously the media journalists. They're the only ones that are really talking about it. It's like,
yeah, same as himself.
It's a shame that, you know, there's not more hype around it. I mean, obviously, as we now approach fight week, things might change and really ramp up over the next couple of days. But I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be one of the best fights of the year, without a doubt. It's definitely not going to be a stinker, as you said. So really looking forward to this one. But we've also got you on as well, because obviously we've got fights that have just occurred over the weekend, and we wanted to discuss them and really sort of break down what happened over the weekend. There was one particular card, obviously, in Manchester this weekend, topped by Joshua Buatsi, who knocked his opponent out, Daniel Dos Santos, in quite stunning fashion. And I'd like to start really at the top of the bill and work my way down for a couple of notable fights. Talking about Joshua Buatsi, probably the best prospect that we've got in the UK as a whole at the moment, and a guy that many people believe is going to be a world champion in a matter of maybe a year or so. And last night, got in there with an undefeated fighter, and he took his time, he picked his punches, and he picked a beautiful shot that ended his opponent. And he just goes on. And for me, like I said, one of the best prospects, if not the best we've got in the country. But I think it was a very cool, calm, and collected performance from Buatsi.
It was, yeah. It was a very workmanlike performance, and I was actually really delighted to see how patient he was, especially considering his last fight against Chalic, where he went out with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and Chalic ended up outboxing him for 4 or 5 rounds, and he had an injury, and he had to come on top of that and show his grit in that fight. Whereas last night, he had a lot of pressure on his shoulders, especially because he wasn't meant to be topping the bill.
Yeah.
And when you're told, what was it, 11 days before the fight, oh, you're top of the bill now on Sky Sports, here you go, off you go. And he stayed calm. He picked his punches very well. First 2-3 rounds, just had a look at the Santos to see what he had, because obviously an unknown southpaw who's 15-0, you don't want to take any silly risks. And he also had the extra pressure of having a renowned trainer in Virgil Hunter in his corner, and he had to box the specifics of what Hunter wanted him to do and not revert back to his old ways. And it was a punch perfect performance, really. There's not much else you can say. Like, I know you can say what you want about the Santos, oh, he fought no one, he was nobody, but you still have to go in there and you still have to perform, and you have to win at the end of the day. And that's what he did, and he did it in good fashion as well, because the knockout was vicious. And you even seen himself, he apologized after he threw the second punch, because he knew he didn't have to throw it after he landed it, but it's just it's the name of the game at the end of the day. Protect yourself at all times. So what
do you think now about where Buatsi goes? Because obviously there's always a lot of talk of Buatsi being the next light heavyweight champion of the world. He's had some good tests on his record so far, but I look at another fighter from the same crop of Olympians, and I think of the way Lawrence Okolie has made himself a name, and he's become a cruiserweight champion, seemingly
Yes.
not having these step ups in a certain way. I think if Okolie can do it as he's done, I think there's no reason why Buatsi couldn't step up. But would you argue that he needs a little bit more of a world level gatekeeper before he goes for that?
Yeah, I believe so. I think with Okolie, as an example, he did come up the traditional way, like Commonwealth, British, European, and then world. And I think what Okolie has as well, which Buatsi doesn't have, so to speak, is the physicality. Like Okolie's a freak of nature. Again, the same day I met Josh Taylor, I met both Buatsi and Okolie. And Jesus Christ, I felt like a small man stood next to Okolie. He's a big guy. And I thought to myself, how does he make 200 pounds? Like it doesn't look like it's possible for him to do it. He's that big. And he's got the punch as well, as we've seen against Glowacki. He'll put your lights out if he lands. But I think the biggest thing in Okolie's arsenal is his coach in Shane McGuigan. They really mesh well, and he's got that jab flowing properly now. He used to be quite stiff, robotic, and he was very nervous too. And I think because Shane McGuigan is well known for lots of sparring in camps, and he even had a fellow Irishman over to spar with him, and like he had hard rounds in the sparring for Okolie for that fight with Glowacki, and he had him very, very well versed on what he had to do. And Okolie's physicality, like he'll soon be a heavyweight. So I think that's a big difference between him and Buatsi, where Buatsi's not a massive guy. I'd say Buatsi could make super middle if he wanted to, but Buatsi, I think, has that IQ that Okolie doesn't have. I think that's what makes him a bit different. He's a very astute individual. He's very intelligent. I think he actually has the same degree that I have. I think he did sports science as well. Not saying that I'm mega smart on him, but yeah, Buatsi's very smart in the ring. He's thinking all the time. But I think he does have to be stepped up a couple more times before I throw him in with world level. Like in the British scene, I mean, the light heavyweight division's on fire. But I think I would definitely put Lyndon Arthur above him at the moment, especially after Lyndon Arthur's last performance. Callum Johnson, it's hard to say because he's a banger, but he can also get hit too. And then Yard, I wouldn't put Yard in the same class as Buatsi, to be honest. I think he's got natural physical gifts, but I think Buatsi's probably number 2 in Britain for me. But I'd step him up a couple more times, maybe fringe world level, we'll say, a couple times, and then you'd have to put him in with like an ex-world title challenger or something like that. And even a fellow matchroom fighter, Craig Richards, he had a great showing against Bivol. He did himself really proud. Like I was proven wrong that day. I thought Bivol would put him out of there in 5 or 6 rounds, and he really showed his class. So we might even see the likes of Buatsi versus Richards before Buatsi moves on. I think that would really show his level. But sky's the limit for Buatsi, really, isn't it?
I think they need to do the domestic fights first. I mean, I know they could easily go down a different route and try to get him straight into the top 10 and try to get him a fight with a former world title challenger or sort of, fringe world level fighter in the heavyweight division. But I honestly think like you've reeled off a few names that we're all well aware of. And I agree with the fact that you put Lyndon Arthur the best British light heavyweight we've got. And he's got one of the best jabs in the country by far. Absolutely great fighter. And I think Buatsi needs them level of fights. I think domestically, I think within 3 fights, you could definitely get him up to sort of a level where you could be looking at a fringe world for former world title challenger. I think
I agree.
These fights, guys like Callum Johnson, who are at the stage of the career where he needs fights now. What is Callum Johnson, about 35, I think now, and I think he needs to be fighting. And a guy like Buatsi's a name that really he could be fighting, but it depends on how Eddie can bring it all together and whether he can get the right level of opponents. But I do agree. I think when you look at what's next for Buatsi, for me, he needs maybe another domestic opponent, a name on the domestic scene, and Anthony Yard. That's one that's been, they've been talking about that for about 18 months. Maybe that could be.
Both of them from London, and they've had that kind of back and forth, haven't they, before? But I'd be surprised if we saw Yard step it up again until next year. I think he'll be progressed a lot slower now, since he was kind of showing what level he was at against Arthur, So I think whatever he does with his camp, we don't know yet. In my opinion, he needs to make changes there. But I hope we see that fight maybe next year. But for Boazzi, I'd stick him in with maybe a Shakan Pitters or someone like that. Someone who is themselves kind of on their way back, trying to rebuild themselves and needs a win. Someone who's going to come to fight. Like DeSantos, I think I saw DeSantos eat a double jab in the first round, and that was it. Then he was on his bike. He did. I don't think he came to win after the first round, to be honest. And it was different to see the likes of Chalic against Boazzi the time before last. He was in there to win, and that was it. And he had that attitude. He was like, I'm not going down. And then obviously Boazzi got the better of him. But when you see someone who's in there to beat Boazzi, that's, I think, when you see the best of Boazzi as well.
Yeah.
Because he's even though he's not boxing that long, he's got a great IQ, and he's very fit and he's very strong. And I think a couple of domestic fights or fringe European world level fights, then step him up against like an ex-world title challenger or something like that. And that's when the proof will be in the pudding, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. So let's move on to a couple of the other fights on the card then. Gamal Yafai, Jason Cunningham, then that was a really interesting fight. I did really enjoy watching that particular fight. I think most people, including myself, felt like Yafai was going to box to a points decision. And in fact, Jason Cunningham on 3 weeks' notice came in with all that experience on his resume, regardless of how you look at his resume, regardless of the fact that he's got 6 losses, but he's got 28 wins on there. And he came to win last night, and win he did. And I think it was quite a humbling fight for Yafai, really, because obviously Cunningham hurt him on a number of occasions. He dropped him as well, of course. And it kind of just felt like the underdog got his day with that particular fight. And I honestly didn't think like Cunningham would go in there and do that. It's not being disrespectful to him. I've seen obviously what he's done over the past few years. He's very well respected, and I've got nothing but respect for him as a fighter. But when I looked at Yafai and his amateur pedigree and where he is at in his career and what he's looking to try and do, I kind of felt like this would be a performance for him to show that he is ready to move back up again. But actually, it's proven yet again that he's still got a little bit of learning to do in the professional game before he can really step up. And it also begs a question as to whether will he actually get to the level that he's been projected to get to now.
Yeah, it's a funny one with Yafai, because against similar opposition to Cunningham, no disrespect to Cunningham, he's looked $1 million. And then when Yafai won the European belt, he didn't look that great. Like he showed vulnerability in that fight too, and he had to bite down his gum shield and get the victory, which he obviously did to win the belt. But last night, I think he got the shock of his life when Cunningham came in there and put him on his arse. And Yafai said to himself, right, this is a fight here, and then before he knew it, 6 rounds were gone, and he'd been knocked down 3 times, and Cunningham was still coming on strong. And I thought one thing I did like about Yafai's performance was he didn't come out in round 7 or 8 and think, right, I'm just going to survive now. He tried to defend his belt the best he could, and he showed a lot of heart, which you can't teach heart. You either have it or you don't. So he's got the variables you can't teach, but I think his inside game needs a lot of work, and he's dependent on his punch too much. I think when you step up the levels, these lads, especially the likes of Cunningham, who you say had 34 fights coming into this, had been in with a who's who, 6 losses, but they weren't against nobodies. And he was tough as anything, and he ate whatever Yafai gave to him, and he came back. And I think 3 weeks notice. How long was he out? Was it like 22 months he was out for? He hadn't fought in like 22 months. So I'm sure Yafai probably won't admit it, but I'm sure in the back of his head he thought to himself, right, I'm going to come in now and kill this fella 2 or 3 rounds. And then he ended up in a war. So I think mentally he probably wasn't fully prepared. I seen Eddie Hearn talking about a rematch for that fight. I think a rematch would definitely go in Yafai's favour. I think he's seen everything Cunningham has to give now, and the likes of Max McCracken and stuff working with Jafai, such great coaches. They'll work on what needs to be worked on. But when it comes to world level, I think he could be 2 or 3 years away from that.
Yeah, I agree. I think I liked the performance from Jason Cunningham. It was nice in a way to see a guy like that who's been a great servant to the sport actually get
For
this
sure.
this good moment of glory. And I think it just proves that obviously Yafai does need to go back to the drawing board. And like you said, sometimes there might have been a little bit of complacency going into it, knowing that, he had a guy coming in on 3 weeks' notice, and maybe there was a little shred of him that felt like he was going to go in there and he was going to be able to do a job, and he had the skills to just go and beat Jason Cunningham. Maybe that was an oversight. I mean, obviously we don't know because we don't know what's going on in the mind of Yafai, but you can only sort of make an assumption as to why the performance in the earlier rounds wasn't as good and why he had to try and step up so much later on in the fight, which is what he tried to do. And you're right. I give him credit for that, Luke. I give him credit for trying to come on at the end, and he really did try to defend his belt.
Like what I seen last night out of Yafai as well was something I don't usually see out of him. In the first round, came out very flat-footed, came out very lackadaisic nearly, as if to say, right, this is going to be nothing to me. Usually he's out, hands up to his chin, center of the ring, let's see what you've got kind of thing. But I don't think he feared anything out of Cunningham. And I just think he didn't have that, I don't know, that edge, that nervousness maybe that you need to have, especially in the likes of a European title fight where they'll bite your hand off for that title. Do you know what I mean? So I think complacency probably did play a part, whether he knew about it or not. Like whether he was aware of his own complacency or not, or whatever it was. But if there is a rematch, I think we will see a totally different fight to the first one.
What do you think about Tommy McCarthy's performance last night? And obviously the defence of the EBU European Cruiserweight title, 6-round stoppage. Tommy McCarthy, just for me, seems to have gotten better over the past couple of fights. And I was really impressed with his victory and the way he ground out that victory last night. And he's set himself up with a fight against Chris Billum-Smith, which I think will be an absolute barnstormer. They're talking about this year's Matchroom Fight Camp and that being the fight for that. That's going to be a great fight. But let's just go back and give me your assessment of how Tommy McCarthy got on last night.
What I was impressed with the most about McCarthy wasn't even his in-ring performance. It was the shape of him. I've never seen him looking so lean and solid and strong at the weight. Like he had it on his Instagram that he was working with a new nutritionist, and you hear this all the time from different boxers, but he showed it in the ring that night. He was strong and he was fit, and even though he was a lot more muscular, he was faster. Like he let his shots go 3s and 4s, no problem, and he fought with confidence, and he picked that body shot lovely in the 4th round, and once that shot landed, I think his opponent was kind of thinking to himself, right, I'm in survival mode now. And then he listened to Pete Taylor and he got him out of there in the next 2 rounds. So I think it was a great performance for McCarthy. And there's one he needed as well, because he's had a few flat performances. Like the Riakporhe fight, he was injured first, apparently. Obviously, Riakporhe is a beast as well. He's a freak of nature himself. But McCarthy's really dusted himself off and he's done brilliantly, especially since teaming up with Pete Taylor as well. It's made a big difference to his game. And he's boxing to orders, using his jab, using his movement and his speed, and he can punch a bit too, as we've seen last night. So the fight with him and Chris Billum-Smith, like I wasn't impressed with Chris Billum-Smith's last performance at all. Apologies, I forget your man's name. He fought the Czech Republic guy, but that was a bit of a war. And Billum-Smith made it a hard night for himself. And I think if he lets McCarthy hit him like that, I think he'll be in for a very tough night. I think McCarthy will stop him.
Interesting. Early predictions for that one coming out already. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be an early fight.
Like I've seen McCarthy boxing up at the National Stadium in Dublin as an amateur, and he's got that pedigree. He's boxed with the best in the world at the amateur level. Excuse me, and through the pros. He's not had it easy. Like he's not come up the easy route, so to speak. And he's got that belt now, and I think he's got that self-confidence and the efficacy as well of knowing I am the champion. I have defended this belt, and I am getting better and better. I think with that confidence as well that he's bringing into it, I think he will be hard to beat up to a certain level.
So let's move on to one final fight. There's one particular fight I wanted to cover from last night. It's Lerone Richards' performance last night. I think against Giovanni Di Carolis for the vacant EBU super middleweight title. People were absolutely raving about him last night on social media. They were talking about his performance being absolutely outstanding and a true boxing clinic. And do you know what? I agree. That was a brilliant performance. And people say, well, maybe if he had a little bit more spite or power in his punches, he'd be absolutely brutal as a finisher. But sometimes you don't always need that. And he's proven again last night that he's just got so much skill and ability that he can box a guy's ears off for the distance for 12 rounds and just make it look so easy. And he walked away from it, and he didn't even look like he'd been in a fight. And it's like, he made that fight so easy. And again, another great performance. And obviously he's in the super middleweight division, and there's a lot of talent, as we know, in that division.
Yeah, it's a very hot division.
I just think where does he go from? Where does he go from here now? And how did you assess that performance?
I thought the fact that it was for the EBU belt was a bit of a disservice to the fight, because I don't think it was an EBU level fight personally. Richards obviously showed he's got great ability last night. He did what he wanted in there. As he was singing, what was it, Hot Cross Buns in the post-fight interview, I think he was nearly probably singing that to himself during the fight too. It was that easy for him. He was using what he has. Big long arms, long legs, fast feet, and just peppering away at him. And Di Carolis couldn't get near him. And I think he broke him down mentally within the first 2 or 3 rounds, because it was like a game of tag. It was just literally pop, pop, off, and again, same thing. And he was so calm in there as well. That's why he didn't break a sweat, because he didn't get out of first gear. And people are saying, I've seen a lot of people online saying, oh, he should have pushed for the KO, he should have this, he should have that. But at the end of the day, he's in there to win, not to go and knock someone out and maybe get clipped himself. He's in there to win a belt, he's in there to win a fight, and he's there to progress his own career. And if the knockout comes, it comes. But he didn't go looking for it. He was very mature. He's only young himself. He's not an old, seasoned fighter, and he fought like one. So it's great to see something like that from a young lad, especially he was only his second fight with Sky Sports as well. So he showed a lot of maturity. And of course, he's got Dave Coldwell in his corner, who has vast experience, both from being under Adam Booth and now having his own stable of fighters. So I think he's in really good hands with Dave Coldwell as well. And where he goes from here, it's hard to tell. Will he defend his title a couple of times, or will he try and push on, or will he fight a few of the domestic fighters, which at super middle, again, another very hot division.
Yeah, interesting fight for that. For Lerone Richards, for me, would be Zach Chelly in the super middleweight division.
Yeah, that would be a good scrap. And even you've got the Little Levers Meat Cleaver up near yourselves.
Cullen,
160, yeah. Cullen, he comes to win every time, and I think he's filled out a bit, And I think him versus Richards could be like Richards. He's got such size on him as well. That lad will move up through the weights surely. He's huge. And I think domestically, like Zach Chelly, I thought he was unlucky last time out, to be honest. And he's trained by his father, isn't he, Zach?
Yeah.
So they you know well that Zach is put through his paces by his dad, and I mean, he will never be out of shape. You won't see Zach Chelly out of shape, because he lives in the gym. So I think even if it was such a thing as Richards fighting it again in 5-6 weeks, oh yeah, we'll throw him in with him. Do you know what I mean? So that's a good fight, and I think Richards would have to show a punch in that fight. And I mean, the level he's fought at so far, it's hard to know if he does have a dig on him for such a big lad. But I think in the super middleweight division, especially when you come to the top levels, ignoring the likes of Canelo and whatnot, like you look back at the British fighters, the likes of Ben, Eubank, they all had a big punch. So I think if he's going to carry himself to world level, he will need to have a have a dig on him to make lads respect him. But when you can box like that too, why not?
No, I agree. Absolutely. And thank you, obviously, for going through and giving your insight into, a lot of these fights that we've covered for the recap of the boxing over the weekend. And I did say at the start of the show, I did say that we were going to go through and just quickly discuss like where you are, because the last time, we spoke properly in this fashion was about really your life story and where you were and where you are.
Yeah.
And obviously that's been a few months, since that's happened. And I'll just be interested to know with the way things are going at the moment with the restrictions being lifted, how's that affected you now? What are we looking at for yourself?
I was quite lucky in a way. So I was signed off of work due to my diabetes. So I was back home with my parents for a couple of months. And obviously my dad is my coach, and we got a lot of training in at home, which is fantastic. We have the garage at home into a little boxing gym, and we've been going over everything, doing lots of pad work, talking tactics, fitness work, just going over absolutely everything. And I was doing great, getting very fit, and was in a good place, mentally and physically. And then unfortunately a few weeks ago I actually injured myself, sprained my LCL and my meniscus in my left knee. But thankfully now, as of last week, I've got the all clear to train again, and I'm back training now, hopefully fighting on the 25th of September, restrictions permitting. That's the date that's been given to me, so hopefully be back in action then, and fingers crossed by the last quarter of this year we'll all be looking and laughing at what was a disaster of 2020 and most of 2021. Just have to see how it goes. We can just cross our fingers at the moment, can't we?
Yeah, that's it. And it's been a pleasure to have you on, of course, and it'll be great to get you on next week for the reaction show to obviously Taylor Ramirez.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have a chat about how that goes down, and it'll be interesting to see what plays out in that particular fight. We're obviously really looking forward to it, and of course for the people that are watching and the people that are listening, of course, I want to say thank you, as always, for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody. We've got some great interviews coming out over the course of the next couple of weeks, so please do keep an eye on this main podcast feed, because as we said, in our commitment to you as listeners and viewers to the podcast, we will be bringing you more episodes with different people from within the sport, and I'm really excited to be getting them out. Career Profiles, Jack Johnson, that's going to be out at the end of this month as well. And for the patrons, there's a new Patreon-only episode coming your way in the next week, so please keep your eyes peeled. Check your emails, check your messages, because that'll be coming out too. And a big shout out to you guys for the support as always. And Johnston will be back with us for the Patreon only episode, and he will be back with us, obviously, of course, for the Jack Johnson episode. Finally, I want to say thank you to yourself, Luke, for coming on and filling in for Johnston.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me, Sean. It was my pleasure.
Fight fans, thank you so much for listening. You know where to follow us at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. The final thoughts for myself, Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez for all the marbles this weekend. Can Josh do it? Can he become the undisputed super lightweight champion of the world, or will Jose Ramirez pull off a bit of an upset coming this week? It's going to be great. Looking forward to it. And of course, thank you to everybody as always for listening. We'll see you next time.